Imagine you're an explorer digging in the dirt in the early 1920s. You know, you've spent years sweating in the sun, and finally you uncover the ruins of something massive.
Right, it's like the ancient equivalent of finding Rome, just buried there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A discovery that completely rewrites the history books for that entire region. But then, imagine that just 12 months later, before the ink is even dry on your discovery, someone taps you on the shoulder and says they just found another Rome.
Yeah, a completely identical, sprawling metropolis just sitting hundreds of miles away. I mean, it's the kind of scenario that would make any historian just, drop their trowel in disbelief.
Right. You spend your life looking for a single anomaly, and suddenly you're staring at a pattern. Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking you on a journey through a very specific, incredibly detailed source document that we've been poring over.
That's a really fascinating one, too.
It is. It's this massive illustrated map charting the Indus Valley civilization, which, you might also hear referred to as the Harappan civilization. And our mission for this deep dive is to use this one visual document, this incredibly dense treasure map, to basically reconstruct a world that was lost for millennia. We're going to trace its major sites, the vital rivers that kept those sites alive, and the fascinating timeline of how modern explorers slowly pulled these cities out of the earth.
Yeah, and to set the scene for you, if you were looking at this map with us right now, your eyes would instantly be drawn to the sheer scale of the geography.
It's just huge.
It really is. It's a vast, sprawling network of intricate, walled cities. But they're not just placed randomly, right? They're all anchored along a massive, meandering blue river system that stretches across some incredibly diverse, unforgiving terrain.
From arid deserts to flat plains.
Exactly, all the way down to coastal regions. And the map is brilliant because it's not just a geographical layout, it's a historical timeline layered directly on top of the topography. It shows where these places are, the specific years they were unearthed, the explorers who found them, and the waterways that bound them together.
I want to start chronologically with the timeline on this map, actually, because the story of how we realized the civilization existed is almost as wild as the civilization itself.
Oh, totally.
We have to look at the very first dominoes to fall in the 1920s. According to the document, the spark happens in 1921. An explorer named Dayaram Sani uncovers Harappa in Punjab, Pakistan.
Which is that initial Rome in your analogy. Finding a complex, highly developed ancient city of that magnitude it changes the entire understanding of human history in the northwestern region.
Right.
It proves that complex urban life existed there far earlier than previously assumed.
But then you follow the timeline on the map, and it shows that literally just 1 year later, in 1922, Mohenjo-daro is discovered.
Just a year.
Yeah, this is in Sindh, Pakistan, situated directly on the Sindhu River, the Indus River. So you find Harappa, and while the dust is still settling on that excavation, you stumble upon an equally massive ancient metropolis the very next year in a totally different province. I am really trying to wrap my head around the odds of that. Does finding two major complex sites in back-to-back years suggest these explorers were operating with, a cheat code?
A cheat code.
Yeah, did they know exactly what they were looking for, or was this just a profound stroke of historical luck?
Well, the visual layout of the map actually helps solve that mystery for us.
Yeah.
If you look at the placement of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, they're separated by hundreds of miles. Yet they're fundamentally connected by this sprawling river system. Finding one city is luck. Finding two cities of this staggering magnitude in back-to-back years, separated by that kind of distance, that completely shatters the existing archaeological paradigm.
Because it means you aren't just looking at an isolated kingdom.
Exactly. It proves immediately to the scientific community that there was a dominant, vast, highly organized society controlling the entire region. The visual weight of those two massive sites on the map illustrates how rapidly the narrative shifted.
From we found an interesting old settlement to
we just tripped over an entirely new cradle of human civilization.
Yeah.
And that realization is what fueled the next several decades of intense exploration. Once they grasped the sheer scale they were dealing with, the search parameters changed entirely.
Which is a perfect segue into the next layer of this map. Because once you establish Harappa and Mohenjo-daro as these central hubs, the immediate question is, well, how far does this empire actually stretch?
Right, where are the borders?
Exactly, and the map plots the extreme edges, and looking at the distance is staggering. Let's look at the westernmost point shown here. The map notes that in 1928, Sukhagon was discovered in Balochistan, Pakistan, and it's anchored by the Dash River.
And we should pause to consider the geography of Balochistan.
Oh, definitely.
It is a very harsh, unforgiving, mountainous desert environment. It's not the kind of place where a massive urban center naturally springs up without immense logistical support, especially compared to the fertile plains of the central Indus Valley.
Yeah, and then if you trace your finger all the way across the map to the extreme eastern edge, you hit a site called Alamgirpur. This is in Uttar Pradesh, India.
Found much later, right?
Yeah, the map shows it wasn't found until decades later in 1958. And this site is tethered to the Hindon River. So you're looking at a territory spanning from the Dashk River in the deserts of Balochistan all the way to the Hindon River in Uttar Pradesh.
It's an immense footprint.
It is. But here's the thing that really stands out when you look at the illustrations. Every single major site on this map is pegged directly to a water source. Now, my first instinct when I see ancient walled cities surrounded by water is defense, like a massive moat to keep invading armies at bay.
Sure, that makes sense on the surface.
But looking at the sheer size of these rivers, a moat feels like overkill. What am I missing here? Were these rivers primarily defensive, or did they serve a completely different function?
Well, the visual data here makes a very strong argument that these rivers were not moats. They were the ancient equivalent of superhighways. Superhighways, yeah. To understand why that matters, you have to think about the basic physics and calorie economics of the ancient world. If you want to move heavy goods over land, let's say you're transporting timber, massive quantities of grain, or standardized mud bricks, it's incredibly slow. You need carts. You need beasts of burden like oxen.
And those oxen have to eat the very grain they're hauling, right?
That is the core problem. Every mile you travel by land, your profit margin gets eaten by your own transport animals. Plus, you're entirely limited by the terrain. You hit a mountain range or a deep desert, and your trade route effectively dies. But water is frictionless.
Ah, so you put a ton of grain on a barge, and the river does the heavy lifting.
The river provides the kinetic energy. The map illustrates these rivers as thick, vital arteries connecting every single settlement for a reason. They weren't just there to provide drinking water or irrigate crops, although, that is the baseline of survival. These rivers were the logistical infrastructure of the empire. You brought up the massive geographical spread from Balochistan to Uttar Pradesh. The only way a civilization maintains a unified identity, consistent urban planning, and standardized weights and measures across that mind-boggling distance is through rapid, high-volume communication and trade.
Wait, let me stop you there, because the concept of standardized mud bricks is something I keep seeing referenced, but it's hard to grasp why it's such a big deal. Why is finding the same size brick in two different cities considered a massive revelation?
Because it's an administrative nightmare to pull off. Imagine trying to get a brick maker 500 miles away to bake a clay brick to the exact millimeter dimensions you require.
I can barely get a contractor to do that today.
Exactly. You don't have the internet, you don't have a postal service, you have to send a physical standard, an inspector, or detailed mathematical instructions down the river on a boat. And you have to enforce that rule across millions of bricks, across hundreds of cities. The fact that we find identical bricks and identical weights at these extreme edges proves there was a centralized authority. And the rivers were the only mechanism capable of binding those edges to the center.
That paints such a vivid picture. It's like looking at a map of a modern interstate highway system. If you want to find a major city today, you don't wander blindly into the wilderness, you look where the major highways intersect.
Spot on.
But that raises a fascinating problem. What happens when the highway literally disappears? Because as we look at the timeline on this map, we move into the 1950s, which is a massive golden age for discoveries. And it looks like the explorers faced that exact issue and solved it in a really ingenious way.
The methodology of how we found these cities definitely had to evolve.
It did, and the map highlights a specific explorer in 1953 named Amlanan Ghosh. According to the document, Ghosh discovered two major sites in Rajasthan, India, in the exact same year, Kalibangan and Banapala.
In the same year.
Right. And crucially, the map places both of these sites along the exact same waterway, the Ghaggar River. Now, Rajasthan is heavily desert, and the Ghaggar is a seasonal, largely dried up riverbed. So imagine being Amlanan Ghosh. You uncover Kalibangan, and then instead of just digging in random sand dunes, you seemingly just take a walk down a dry riverbed and stumble right into Banapala. It feels like he stopped treating archaeology like a lottery and started using the ancient landscape itself as a treasure map.
That is a phenomenal way to describe it because it represents a monumental shift in the science of archaeology. The earlier discoveries in the 1920s, while brilliant, often relied heavily on visible mounds or following up on local legends.
Like tipping them off.
Yeah, but the timeline on this map shows a clear intellectual progression. By the time we reached 1953, explorers like Ghosh had synthesized the data. They recognized the undeniable pattern. The Harappan people fundamentally did not build away from the water.
So if you want to find a lost city, you don't look for the city, you look for the ghost of the river.
You read the ancient landscape. Ghosh knew that rivers shift course or dry up over millennia, but the geological depression, the ghost of the waterway, remains.
That's so smart.
Instead of surveying thousands of square miles of empty desert in Rajasthan, he used the dry bed of the Gaga River as a literal roadmap. By walking that specific path, he knew with absolute certainty that he was walking the same logistical route the Harappan traders would have traveled 4,000 years earlier.
Wow.
It was targeted, systematic, highly analytical archaeology. And the reward for that methodology was pulling 2 major cities out of the earth in a single year.
It's brilliant detective work. You're essentially profiling the civilization's behavior to predict where they would have lived.
Exactly.
And as we trace the map further down the timeline into the late 50s and 60s, the discoveries start pushing further south into Gujrat. Like we see Lothal discovered in 1956.
Right, by S.R. Rao on the Mava River.
Yeah, and Dhalaviri uncovered in 1967 by J.P. Joshi on the Bhavdar River. We also see Rakhigarhi in Haryana, India, discovered in 1962. But beyond the dates and the names, there's a visual element to this map that completely changes how you view these cities.
The illustrations themselves.
Right. The artist didn't just draw generic little house icons for every location.
The illustrations contain very deliberate clues about the function of these settlements.
They really do. Let's look closely at a site called Mohenjo-daro. The map notes this is in Sindh, Pakistan, and it was investigated earlier, around 1934. But look at the drawing itself. It's depicted with these tall, smoking chimneys. They look like massive industrial kilns. It genuinely looks like a 19th century factory town. But then you look over at Dhalaviri, discovered in the 60s in Gujrat, and it's drawn with these intricate, geometric, step-like water structures.
Massive reservoir.
Yeah, massive reservoirs. It's a completely different aesthetic. When I look at this, it doesn't look like a map of where people just built houses and slept. It looks like a modern satellite view of zoning laws. You have Mohenjo-daro acting as a heavy manufacturing sector with those chimneys, while Dhalaviri is heavily engineered for water management. Is it a stretch to call this ancient urban zoning?
It is not a stretch at all. In fact, it's one of the most vital insights we can pull from this source material.
Really?
Yeah. When we imagine ancient Bronze Age societies, the popular temptation is to picture a collection of identical, self-sustaining farming villages. We imagine everyone just scraping by, growing their own wheat, and making their own crude pottery in their backyard.
Right, just basic survival.
But these specific visual clues, the smoking kilns at Mohenjo-daro and the massive stepwells at Dhalaviri, prove that this civilization had moved far beyond mere subsistence.
Because if you have a town full of kilns, those people aren't farming, they're working in a factory.
Exactly the point. They were engineering diverse, purpose-built urban centers. Mohenjo-daro, as the smoking chimneys suggest, was a massive hub for manufacturing. We're talking about an industrial zone dedicated to the mass production of beads, intricate seals, and specialized trade goods.
Oh, wow.
The people living there were artisans and laborers whose entire daily life revolved around industry. They were likely relying on other cities to grow the food, which was then floated down those river superhighways to feed them.
That requires an immense amount of trust in the network. You're betting your life that the agricultural city up the river is going to send the grain barges on time.
It requires profound social organization. And then you contrast that with Dhalaviri. Dhalaviri is situated in a much more arid coastal environment in Gujarat. They didn't have the luxury of a constantly overflowing river,
Yeah.
so their engineering genius was poured entirely into survival infrastructure, creating complex, interconnected reservoirs and step-like structures to harvest, channel, and store every single drop of monsoon rain. They were adapting deeply to their specific local geography while still plugging into the larger economic network.
So it wasn't just a copy and paste job. They didn't just take the blueprint for Harappa and stamp it down in Gujarat. From the heady industrial zones of Mohenjo-daro uncovered in the 30s, to the complex, water-hoarding coastal hubs found in the 60s, it was a highly specialized machine.
It was.
One city manufactures the goods, another city manages the maritime trade out to the ocean, and another serves as the agricultural breadbasket. It feels incredibly modern.
It's a level of macroeconomic planning that is staggering to contemplate. It was a highly specialized, interdependent society.
It really gives you a sense of vertigo when you step back and look at the whole map at once. We've spent this deep dive tracing the veins of a civilization that was so much more than just a collection of old walls.
Absolutely.
We started out in the brutal, unforgiving deserts of Balochistan with Sukhagon, followed the massive river highways all the way to the plains of Uttar Pradesh at Alamgarpur, and tracked the economic spread down to the coastal trade hubs of Gujrat. And we watched how explorers, operating over the course of almost half a century, from Dayar Memsani's initial shock at unearthing Harappa in 1921 to J.P. Joshi deciphering the reservoirs of Dholaviri in 1967, slowly, painstakingly pieced this massive puzzle together.
A remarkable testament to human curiosity and systematic scientific inquiry. But as we wrap up our analysis of this map, there is one final lingering puzzle that this visual evidence leaves me with. And it's something that isn't explicitly written in the text, but it's screaming at us from the layout.
I'm always here for a lingering puzzle. What's standing out to you?
Consider the sheer geographical footprint we just walked through. This map shows a civilization that completely ignores our modern political boundaries. It sprawls massively across modern-day India and Pakistan. It's a vast, intimidating amount of territory, tied together only by the winding blue lines of those river systems. Yet, if you look closely at the illustrations of the cities themselves, whether you're looking at Harappa in the north, Mohenjo-daro in the center, or Lothal down on the coast, there is a uniform, rigidly structured, walled layout. They clearly share the exact same architectural language.
They all look like they were built by the same architect.
They do. So here is the puzzle for you to consider. Without a single modern communication tool, we are talking about a society with no telegraphs, no internet, not even a centralized horseback postal service that we have any evidence of. How did a city in the harsh deserts of Balochistan coordinate to build and organize itself so identically to a city thousands of miles away in Uttar Pradesh?
That's a great question.
How do you enforce a unified zoning law or ensure that a mud brick is the exact same size across a territory that massive using only the slow flow of a river to connect you?
That really recontextualizes the whole thing, doesn't it? It makes you look at the blank spaces on the map between the cities with a lot more respect.
Definitely.
The sheer willpower, the bureaucracy, and the unseen organization it must have taken just to hold that entire network together without it fracturing. It's a completely different kind of treasure than a chest full of gold coins, but honestly, understanding how human beings pulled that off is infinitely more valuable.
Very well said.
Thank you to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you look at a map, any map, try to remember to look beyond just the points marking the cities. Look at the lines that connect them, and ask yourself what it really takes to keep